The Snowman's Curse. On the outskirts of a small snowbound town, where the frost-bitten trees formed eerie silhouettes against the night sky, there stood a peculiar patch of land known as Hollow Hill. Locals avoided it like the plague, muttering dark tales of strange happenings and whispered curses. But to 12-year-old Lucy and her brother Ben, Hollow Hill was nothing more than an untouched canvas for their winter escapades. One December evening, as the first real snowfall of the season blanketed the town, Lucy and Ben decided to build the biggest snowman the town had ever seen. They ventured to Hollow Hill with a wheelbarrow full of mismatched scarves, buttons, and a battered old top hat they had found in their grandfather's attic. As the cold bit at their cheeks and the moon cast a pale glow over the frozen land, they got to work. "This place is creepy," Lucy muttered, glancing at the surrounding woods. "It's just a hill," Ben scoffed, rolling the base of the snowman. "Besides, if we're going to win the town's snowman contest, we need space to build something massive." Lucy nodded reluctantly and started shaping the midsection. As they worked, the snow seemed unnaturally perfect, clumping together in an almost clay-like consistency. The siblings barely noticed how quiet the world around them had become, as if the hill had swallowed all sound. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of snow beneath their boots. By the time they finished, the snowman towered over them, standing nearly 8 feet tall. Its body was smooth and symmetrical, its arms fashioned from twisted, gnarled branches that Lucy had found at the edge of the woods. For eyes, they used jagged chunks of black coal. For a mouth, a crooked line of stones. Ben placed the top hat on its head, completing the creation. "It's perfect," he said, stepping back to admire their work. Lucy shivered, not from the cold, but from a strange unease that crept over her. The snowman's eyes seemed to glint in the moonlight, almost as if they were watching her. "Let's go home," she said, tugging at Ben's sleeve. "It's getting late." Reluctantly, Ben agreed, and the two trudged back to their house, leaving the snowman standing alone on the hill. That night, Lucy was jolted awake by a sound outside her window, a slow, deliberate scraping, like something heavy being dragged through the snow. She froze, her heart pounding. Summoning her courage, she peeked out from behind the curtain. The snowman was gone. In its place were deep, uneven tracks leading from the hill to the edge of their yard. Lucy gasped and shook Ben awake. "The snowman! It moved!" she whispered urgently. Ben groaned, rubbing his eyes. "You probably just had a bad dream," he muttered. But Lucy insisted, and eventually, Ben followed her to the window. His face went pale when he saw the tracks. "Maybe someone knocked it down and dragged the pieces away," he offered, though his voice lacked conviction. The siblings decided to check in the morning, but sleep eluded them both. The next day, the snowman was back. It stood in their front yard, looking exactly as it had the night before. The same jagged coal eyes, the same crooked stone mouth. But something was different. Its stick arms were now bent forward, as if reaching out toward the house. "Who could have moved it?" Lucy whispered, her breath fogging in the cold morning air. Ben shook his head. I don't know." Determined to prove it was just a prank, Ben grabbed a shovel and knocked the snowman down, scattering its parts across the yard. Lucy watched uneasily as he buried the coal and stones beneath a mound of snow. That night, the scraping sound returned, louder and more insistent. This time, both siblings looked out the window to see the snowman standing directly beneath it, its crooked mouth stretched wider into a sinister grin. The coal eyes seemed to burn like embers in the darkness. Lucy screamed, waking their parents. But when they came to look, the yard was empty. "You two need to stop scaring yourselves," their father said gruffly. "There's nothing out there." But Lucy and Ben knew better. The snowman's visits became more frequent. its form growing more grotesque with each appearance. Its arms seemed to elongate, clawing at the windows. Its coal eyes now glowed faintly red, and its body emitted a faint icy mist. No matter how many times they destroyed it, the snowman always returned, closer and more menacing than before. Desperate, the siblings turned to their grandfather, the only one in the family who believed their story. When they mentioned the top hat, his face turned ashen. "Where did you find that hat?" he demanded. "In your attic," Ben said. "Why?" Their grandfather's hands trembled. That hat belonged to a man named Elias Grigg. He was wronged by the townsfolk years ago. Some say he cursed the land before he disappeared. I thought I'd burned all his things, but... He trailed off, his eyes filled with fear. "How do we stop it?" Lucy asked, her voice shaking. "You can't," their grandfather said grimly. "Not until it finishes what it started." That night, the snowman came for them. Lucy and Ben barricaded their bedroom door, but the sound of crunching snow and splintering wood grew louder. When the door finally gave way, the room was empty. The snowman's jagged grin was the last thing they saw as an icy darkness swallowed them whole. The next morning, their parents found nothing but a puddle of water and 2 scarves on the bedroom floor. Hollow Hill remained silent, its secrets buried beneath the snow, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitors to awaken the curse. The snowman's shadow. In the heart of a desolate winter, the small village of Frosthaven lay shrouded in perpetual silence. Snow piled high on the roofs, muffling the sounds of life. The residents, wary of the relentless cold, rarely ventured outdoors after sunset. But there was one story that ensured their shutters stayed closed and their fires burned bright at night. The tale of the snowman's shadow. Years ago, when Frosthaven was still bustling with miners and traders, a stranger arrived just as the first snowstorm of the season descended. No one knew his name or where he came from, but his presence unsettled the villagers. Tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the soul, he took up residence in an abandoned cabin at the edge of the woods. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried an ominous weight. He warned the villagers to respect the snow, to never shape it into a man's likeness. "Snow remembers," he whispered one evening at the tavern. "It's not meant to bear the image of the living." The villagers dismissed him as a madman, though they couldn't deny the chill his words brought. Months later, the stranger vanished during another fierce storm, leaving behind only whispers and unease. Years passed, and the stranger became a ghost story told to scare children. But one particularly harsh winter, 3 teenagers decided to mock the old tale. Evelyn, Marcus, and Peter, bored and restless, ventured to the town square on a bitterly cold evening. The snow was deep and heavy, perfect for building. "Let's make it as big as we can," Marcus said, rolling a massive snowball for the base. "Bigger than anyone's ever seen." Evelyn laughed. "And creepier too. We'll give it a real face, not just coal and a carrot." Peter, the quietest of the 3, hesitated. "Maybe we shouldn't. You know the story." Marcus scoffed. "It's just snow, Pete. Don't be such a baby." Together they crafted a towering snowman. Its eyes were shards of broken glass they found near the old mill, its mouth a jagged grin carved with a pocket knife. Evelyn draped her scarf around its neck, and Marcus planted a rusted bucket on its head for a hat. As they stepped back to admire their work, a sudden gust of wind howled through the square, carrying with it an eerie whistling sound. The snowman's shadow stretched unnaturally long under the pale light of the moon, twisting and writhing as if alive. "Did you see that?" Peter asked, his voice trembling. "See what?" Marcus replied, though his bravado faltered. Before anyone could respond, the church bell tolled midnight, its chime echoing ominously through the village. The 3 friends hurried home, the snowman's distorted shadow burned into their memories. The next morning, the villagers awoke to find the snowman still standing in the square, but it had changed. Its glass eyes glinted in the weak daylight, and the jagged grin seemed wider, more menacing. Evelyn's scarf was gone, replaced by a noose of frozen thorns. Whispers spread quickly through Frosthaven. The older residents, remembering the stranger's warning, urged the mayor to destroy it. But by nightfall, no one had dared to approach the snowman. That evening, Evelyn heard a tapping at her window. She pulled back the curtain and gasped. The snowman was in her yard, its grin now impossibly wide. She screamed, waking her parents, but when they came to look, the yard was empty except for a trail of melted snow leading back to the square. The next day, Marcus's mother found his bed empty. His room was unnaturally cold, frost clinging to the walls. A trail of wet footprints led from his bed to the door and out into the snow. Search parties scoured the village and the surrounding woods, but there was no sign of him. Only the snowman remained, now wearing Marcus's hat. Peter, terrified, barricaded himself in his house. He burned his belongings for warmth, refusing to let the fire die. But on the third night, as he sat trembling by the hearth, the flames flickered and went out. The room plunged into darkness. A faint crunching sound came from outside, growing louder. Peter barely had time to scream before the cold consumed him. When the villagers gathered the next morning, the snowman stood taller than ever, its body glistening as if freshly made. Evelyn's scarf, Marcus's hat, and Peter's jacket adorned its figure. Its shadow stretched long and dark, even though the sun was high in the sky. Terrified, the villagers fled Frosthaven one by one, leaving their homes to be swallowed by the snow. The village became a ghost town, and the snowman remained, standing watch in the abandoned square. On cold, windless nights, travelers passing near Frosthaven claim they hear whispers carried on the breeze. Some say the snowman's shadow still moves, reaching out for new victims. Others say it's just the wind playing tricks, but those who venture too close never return.